from, 10 feet to flat, it should bottom. My wrists don't have that stinging sensation they normally have after hitting this jump, and that's a good sign. The Ripley AF, a category-defying, short travel, single-track scorching bicycle, according to Ibis Cycles. I've been riding the bike about 6-7 weeks, and Ibis is pretty on point with that. That said, in this video, we're gonna breathe some new green life into this scorching bicycle of sorts. Before we jump into this video, I want to give a big shout out to Jensen USA. They made this video possible. Thank you, Jensen. I have a link to the Ripley AF down in the description below over to Jensen USA. Anything you purchase from Jensen will directly help support my channel. And if you're looking for some DVO suspension, Jensen is a great dealer for DVO as well. And I will link to both the DVO items we use in this video in that same description right underneath the Ripley AF's link. Beyond Jensen, I do have some more industry affiliations. Big thanks to the guys at P&W Components, Industry 9, and Shimano. The #1 most requested suspension brand that I check out on this channel is in fact DVO stuff. When I built this thing up, Fox was kind enough to sponsor me with a 34 Grip 2 fork at 140 travel. I bespecs the bike with a Fox 34 fork, but they use a 130 travel unit. You can get a different air shaft and bump it up to 140. It's like $42 to do that. Where I'm riding mostly, there's plenty of mountains and plenty of technical terrain, either in Sedona, Arizona, or here in Bellingham, Washington. And for us, the more travel, generally the better, to a point. Before we jump into modifying the bike, I want to measure the geometry and get a rough idea of how it sits with my components on it. All right, let's check some geometry here. So I got a 65, and 64 is right there. So it might be 64.5 or something. Bottom bracket height, I'm right at 335. Wheelbase, 1194 plus or minus 3 millimeters, something like that. Before we go ahead and throw on the new DVO suspension, let's just see how the bike rides on these local trails with the somewhat stock Fox setup. Again, it's a 34 Grip 2 at 140 travel up front. You can get a new air spring to convert your stock 130 Ripley fork to a 140, and I'll link to that in the description below. Furthermore, I'm running the Light Tune Float DPS. It turns out that size small and medium come with a Light Tune shock for riders up to 160 pounds. I'm outside that at 170 pounds, so technically I need the shock from the size large and extra large bikes. That, and I ride more aggressively than I'd say the average rider. Nevertheless, I definitely had a lot of fun with the stock setup, and it works really well for the way I think that bike was intended to be ridden from the get-go. So here I'm riding a couple of intermediate level blue rated trails on our local mountain, and they've got some smaller sized jumps, but this stuff is pretty manageable with the stock setup. I'm still bottoming out on most of the takeoffs and just about all the landings. But you know what? It's not terribly uncomfortable, and I'm still having a good time. When you've got a short travel bike like this, you kind of have to tune your suspension for only one thing. If you set it up for these jumps, once you're more off-road, it's going to be way too firm, so you're always going to have a bit of a compromise on a short travel bike. Now, hucks like this just kind of hurt regardless. This is where a longer travel bike, like a Ripmo, might be a little bit more appropriate. But who cares about appropriate? This is the bike I'm riding right now, and you know what? I'm having fun. With that in mind, let's head back to the shop and try out this new DVO stuff. With anything that could be construed as a review, it's important to disclose if you were sponsored or have a relationship with a company. I don't have any relationship with DVO, but Ibis did send me this DVO care package, and I just want to let you know that that's what the deal is. Little mini shock for the back of the Ripley. Excellent. Awesome. I have been trying for years to get one spare set of Ibis shock hardware. It's finally here. I am not gonna give this up. Oh, cool, super easy to put in more volume reducers. And then there's a Diamond fork. This is their mid-size fork with a 35 mil stanchion. Same stanchion size as a Pike, for instance, 1 mil smaller than a 36, obviously. So this one's been set up at 140 travel. Got low and high speed compression adjust up here, rebound, and then you can adjust how much pressure is on your negative spring with the OTT adjust over here. I probably need medium pressure, and then I don't know if I should go super soft and supple up top or if I'll just sink right through that travel or what. So I'm looking forward to playing at that a little bit. Now we are seated. So I'm running the Ibis Light Tune Float DPS Evol, and I had to put a 0.8 volume reducer in here. Comes stock with a 0.6. Ooh, a tie shock bolt, nice. Out with the old and with the new. Will that fit? Probably not. It's nice that you just need a 5 mil to replace rear shock. Huh, it'd be nicer if you never needed to replace the rear shock. I ride a hardtail. I do have a Ride More Work Less cap. There we go. Now that is a, oh man, Merry Christmas. Red and green. That is a little unfortunate. All right, let's check this Ripley head tube angle. About 65. Bottom bracket height should be 335. Now this is pretty rough, but I'm seeing about a 432 chainstay. Overall wheelbase, hard for me to measure because I'm not very big, but right around 1200. Well, that certainly went on. Pretty smooth, pretty easy. Feels good initially. I'll bring the volume reducers trail side. Maybe I'll swap them on trail side. And then tomorrow, try this on the trail. Today, we're gonna try to compare as best we can this DVO setup, kind of the mini monster truck setup, to the lightweight, more cross-country Fox setup. After setting sag, I quickly realized I needed to run 4 out of the available 5 volume reducers that fit in this shock. After a few rides, I think that's a pretty good setup. That feels okay. It's like it's not crazy icy, so it's not sketchy. Maybe it's a little sketchy, but it's not terrible. The latest Fox 34 is way better than the older units that I remember riding a few years ago. Now that said, the Diamond is a millimeter bigger in diameter and it's noticeably stiffer. This in turn means I've got a little bit more confidence when it comes to jumping blindly into obstacles in the snow. Oh gosh, that's scary. Through this POV footage, you can hear a lot of fender rub on the front tire. Now, this was a mud hugger front fender, and it doesn't really fit well. It fits for a moment, and then you bottom the fork out and your zip ties all break. That said, I just started hunting for a good front fender about 2 or 3 weeks ago. If you have any recommendations about a good front fender that fits the DVO Diamond fork, please do let me know in the comments below. So far, I've tried an RPR bolt-on and this mud hugger zip tie attached fender. And my next unit I'll try is an RPR zip tie-on Pro Guard. The fork does come with a really short, maybe 2.5, 3 inch long fender, but that's not going to cut it for the kind of wet weather we have here in the Pacific Northwest. So if that wasn't gonna bottom out my suspension, then I don't think I can do anything that will. Up front, we definitely bottomed out, broken zip ties and all, but it should break, it should bottom out. On a hit like that from, 10 feet to flat, it should bottom. My wrists don't have that stinging sensation they normally have after hitting this jump, and that's a good sign. So the Mini Mo. So many of you want to build up short travel enduro bikes that have aggressive geometry but not a lot of suspension. Well, I don't have a definitive answer today on if that's indeed as fun as a Ripmo, but I can tell you that I'm keeping that comparison in mind as we go through all this. I must admit, in my head, I thought that rattling of the fender kind of sounded like baseball cards in the spokes and sort of like a dirt bike. I kind of liked it. This bike only has 120 millimeters of travel and back, and it's pretty regressive. But that said, I did notice that with 4 volume reducers installed in the Topaz rear shock, the extra damping available made quite a bit more controlled landing. So I was able to do this manual line quite a bit more easily than I could with the stock shock. Now, I don't know how many of you are doing jump to berm manual lines on your Ripleys, but if you are, I definitely recommend this configuration over the Light Tune Ibis shock.
Because of the new shock, isn't it?
100%. New shock, new manual.
Yeah.
Oh, I finally bottomed this thing out somewhere. Not on the big hucks, but in one of these corners somewhere. Bottom, maybe it was right here. Constant low speed into the corner all manualing. Might have been it, but I guess O-ring does come off the shaft when you bottom it. Awesome. Sweet. It's hard to tell how good your suspension is when you're just hanging on for dear life. I have a handful more rides on this setup, and it's so soft and soggy here. I don't want to say this is tons better than the Fox or just similar to the Fox. I did notice it a ton in the high-performance bike parky jumpy lines, but while riding actual trail conditions, it's too early for me to make an official judgment call or whatnot, but I'm definitely keeping all your questions in mind as I continue to log hours on this bike. So stay tuned. The next update, this build vlog, is going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me, and if you haven't yet, hit that little red subscribe button just below. Thanks, guys. Oh, it leaves the ground easier than it did with the Fox stuff.